and Piffle. Oxford, home of the greatest book in the English language, full of mysteries, comic plots, intrigue and astounding facts. The Oxford English Dictionary tells us what words mean and where they came from. Together, we've launched a new word hunt. We've asked you to send us written evidence of the earliest recorded date for some of our most colourful words and phrases. But will what you send us stand up to the scrutiny of the mighty gatekeepers of the dictionary? Would it help if I pleaded more? With your help, scores of entries in the OED have already been rewritten. But the challenge is not over yet.
They say that history only remembers kings, generals and prime ministers, but dozens of ordinary people are commemorated in our language. Who were they? Did they ever even exist?
Tonight, the OED have asked for our help trying to find the real Gordon Bennett.
I'll get the ammonia, that's what I'll do.
I'll turn it up. You've only had a wash, Gordon Bennett.
They've asked us to go in search of a certain Mickey Bliss, who might have inspired the phrase, taking the mickey.
Very famous Cockney geezer.
Writer Marcel Theroux is on the trail of sweet Fanny Adams.
So you are the oldest surviving relative of Fanny Adams?
But first, who was the real Mary behind the bloodiest of cocktails?
Bloody, adjective and adverb. Sense 2A, special combinations. Bloody Mary, a drink containing vodka and tomato juice.
Oh, that's just what I need. I had far too much to drink last night. Too much tea, that is, with rum in it. Luckily, the Bloody Mary is the finest hangover cure in the world. But which Mary was the inspiration behind it? And what the bloody hell did she do to be given this gruesome yet delicious memorial? The dictionary cites this 1956 edition of Punch as containing the earliest known reference to the drink.
Those two are eating raw steaks and drinking Bloody Marys.
Can we do any better? A good place to start is Britain's first cocktail bar at the Savoy Hotel. Barman Victor Gower started serving cocktails in 1946, 10 years before the dictionary's current date. So can he remember his first Bloody Mary?
The first Bloody Mary I ever served was to Orson Welles. I didn't know how to make it. I was standing here behind the bar, here on my own, a young trainee, and all of a sudden, up the stairs came this gigantic figure. He said to me, "Son, you know what a Bloody Mary is?" So I said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't. But if you tell me how to make it, I can make it for you." He said, "Do you say have vodka here?" So I said, "Yes." "You've got lemon juice?" I said, "Yes." "Well, have you got Worcestershire sauce, celery salt, tomato juice?" So he made it himself.
Now, when would this have been?
Well, it was in the early 50s. I can always remember the occasion, but of course I didn't think I'd ever be called upon sort of 60 years later, 50 years later to remember the date. But it was in the early 50s.
So Victor may have made the first Bloody Mary cocktail in Britain. But he has no written proof of a date to beat 1956, which is the evidence the OED need to update an entry. There's no mystery about who the original Bloody Mary was. Queen Mary I, slayer of Protestants in Tudor England. But did she really make a 400-year leap to inspire a 20th century cocktail? No, 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 say most of those who contacted the word hunt. John Clay is one of many who insist the Bloody Mary was both created and named by 1920s movie star George Jessel. And John says he has evidence to prove it. The story of the cocktail's creation is told in Jessel's autobiography.
This is Georgie, your son from the money every week. How are you, dear? As the story goes, it was late 20s, early 30s in Palm Springs, and he was playing a softball match, and afterwards the winning team got to go to a local club where the winners were allowed to drink champagne. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. They were kind of getting towards the end of their night, but still going quite strong. And they needed something to take the edge off their drunken state. They found some tomato juice, vodka, and mixed the two together, and that was it. That was the first Bloody Mary.
Jessel's story sounds convincing, but what inspired him to give the hangover cure its name? Enter society girl Mary Warburton.
Mary Brown Warburton came into the bar in the morning, and Jessel was there drinking the drink. She came over and he said, "Why don't you try a sip of this new drink?" And as she went to take a sip, it spilt all down her dress, which was white. And then she said, "Now you can call me Bloody Mary, George."
So Mary Warburton was George Jessel's inspiration for naming the Bloody Mary, even though Warburton may have been giving a nod to her namesake, Queen Mary I. The account in George's autobiography seems perfect. But sadly, it wasn't published until 1975, 21 years after the OED's Punch magazine from 1956. Fear not, John told me he had an earlier date up his sleeve.
Got an article here from Lucius Beebe, famous food and drink critic from the time, from the New York Herald Tribune, Saturday, December 2nd, 1939. And it says, George Jessel's newest pick-me-up, which is receiving attention, is called a Bloody Mary. Half tomato juice, half vodka.
That is fantastic. It's got everything. It's got the right phrase, definition, and the date. 17 years earlier than the dictionary have at the moment. They cannot quibble with this. Wish me luck.
Chin-chin.
The word hunt is off to a terrific start. Not only might we have the original Mary, but we've certainly got the origins of the drink back to post-Prohibition New York.
That is definitely good enough for me. It's a fantastic anti-dating to take to the OED later on.
If you look up round robin in the current Oxford English Dictionary, you won't find any evidence, sadly, of a fat chap called Robin. What you will find is grumpy sailors and a naval petition.
Round Robin, a document, especially one embodying a complaint, remonstrance or request, having the names of the subscribers arranged in a circle so as to disguise the order in which they have signed.
But the OED have asked for your help in researching a far more up-to-date sense of the phrase, which isn't yet in the dictionary. And that's the Christmas letter that drives us crazy each festive season. Writer Simon Hoggart has lovingly collected thousands of irritating round robins over the years. He's a very strange man.
Most people seem to loathe them. I think the main reason is that they either tell you too much, too little. If you know these people, you know all the stuff anyway. If you don't know them, then you don't want to know it. So I get lots and lots of covering letters saying things like, "I met this man 24 years ago at a conference in Derby. I have never met his wife. I have never met any of his incredibly talented children. I am fed up with getting this letter." There's a real edge of hatred that many of the recipients feel. Melanie is also doing incredibly well. Though she is only 8, she was shown to have a reading age of 12. I asked her teacher if there were any areas of weakness with Melanie we should be working on. Her reply was, "No, you've given me a little diamond, and all I have to do is polish it."
The OED's earliest evidence for the Christmas round robin is from the Sunday Times in 1988. But we were confident that you could trump it. Sure enough, from Crieff in Scotland, word hunter Douglas Fowler wrote to tell us he's found a cartoon poking fun at the round robin from decades earlier.
I saw the word and I'd come across it somewhere. I hadn't a clue where, but I thought American cartoon for some reason. And what I did was, I was prowling around and I picked up this one, which is the 25-year anniversary volume of the New Yorker cartoons. And this is the cartoon here by Helen Hockinson, where she actually mentions the word round robin, and it is a round robin that had been sent out to the American Armed Forces. Corporal Thomas E. Harrison writes from the Southwest Pacific. "Thank you for your round robin letter. It sure was interesting, and I sure was surprised to get it. Goodbye now." Private First Class Ronald V. Brill writes from somewhere in Alaska. "Well, it certainly was a big surprise." And then, of course, it ends.
So the poor GIs would be getting round robins signed by multiple senders like these in the funny hats. The compilation Douglas found was published in 1951, but we've tracked down the original New Yorker magazine, printed on the 11th of March 1944, which featured the cartoon. That's 44 years earlier than the OED's Sunday Times. The next name we're going to look at is not part of the word hunt. It's one of the great crime stories in the dictionary, The Terrible Tale of Sweet Fanny Adams. Novelist and thriller writer Marcel Theroux heads to darkest Hampshire to investigate.
According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the phrase sweet FA originates from the name Fanny Adams. What does sweet FA mean to you?
Sweet FA?
Yeah,
well, I don't think I could possibly repeat it.
Sweet fuck all.
Sweet Fanny Adams.
Sweet Fanny Adams.
Fuck all.
Sweet fuck all.
You say it quietly. If you say it really quietly, it doesn't. It's not rude.
I wouldn't say it though. I wouldn't.
And Sweet Fanny Adams. Any idea who she might be?
No, not really. I've heard that one as well though, but no.
Fanny Adams was born in Alton in Hampshire in 1859. I wanted to learn more about Fanny's life and was amazed to find out that she has a surviving relative, her great niece, who lives in Farnham in Surrey. Hello, you must be Eileen Meadows.
Yes.
I'm Marcel. Nice to meet you. How are you doing? So you are the oldest surviving relative of Fanny Adams, of the real Fanny Adams?
The real Fanny Adams, yes.
So what happened to Fanny Adams, your relative?
She was about 8 years old when she was murdered. And
she was murdered?
Yes, she was murdered. And according to Gran, when the little girls went home and told them that Fanny had been taken away, the father, my grandfather, went and got his shotgun, went out to see if he could find him.
It's a horrible story, actually, isn't it?
Very awful.
Did your grandparents ever tell you that how the family reacted to the death? I mean,
No.
I know that you said he took her...
Well, I imagine that it must have been pretty painful.
Fanny's murder gripped and shocked the nation, and the newspapers of the day were full of lurid details. To find out who killed Fanny and why, I headed to the market town of Alton, where Fanny had lived and died. Tell me about the day that Fanny died. What happened?
It was a lovely, hot summer's day. And Fanny went out with her friend Minnie Warner, who lived next door, and her younger sister Lizzie. And they went just down the end of this road where there was an area called the Hollow.
When Fanny and her friends got to the Hollow, there was already someone waiting there. A man called Frederick Baker.
The baker leant on the gate with his pipe, watching them on around. Then he picked some early blackberries for them, gave them blackberries, and then the two, Lizzie and Minnie Warner, were fed up. They wanted to go home, so they went off back down the road, and that's when he picked up Fanny and took her up into what was then the hop garden.
Baker's taken her up here.
Baker came up here.
So there doesn't seem to be any evidence that Fanny was screaming or...
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. So they came up here, which of course, once they got a little way up, would have been very secluded with all the hops.
Right.
And no one would have seen.
So because it's August, the hops are in flower and they're growing on these poles. So it's like hedges or almost.
If you like, very, very, very tall hedges.
Fanny Adams was found later that day. She'd been bludgeoned to death and dismembered. A 5-minute walk from where Fanny was brutally murdered lies Alton Town Cemetery. In the middle stands Fanny's grave, set back from the others, all alone. So this is the last resting place of Fanny Adams?
The last resting place of Sweet F.A.
But what happened to Frederick Baker? How did they pin it on him?
Well, bearing in mind he'd been seen taking Fanny into the hop field by her sister and by Minnie Warner. So when the police eventually came on the scene, they went straight to see him. They searched his desk and they found a diary. And written in the diary for the day on which Fanny was killed, it said, killed a little girl.
Frederick Baker was hanged for the murder of Fanny Adams on Christmas Eve, 1867, in front of a crowd of 5,000 people. But there's one more mystery to resolve. The earliest reference the dictionary has for Fanny Adams entering the English language is 1889. Back then, it appears as nautical slang for tinned meat or stew. But why?
The Royal Navy had been using tinned meat since the mid-1840s, around about 1847. We used to get these tins, we'd open them up, and we'd find bits of intestine and palate and offal in them, generally not very nice, and also very, very rotten inside. And the story goes that one day we opened up one of these tins around about 1867, 68, and you look inside and it looks terrible, and one of the guys on the deck of a ship says, well, goodness me, that's what happened to dear sweet Fanny Adams, and it stuck. And the pot over. And that's what we've got in its fullness. Fanny Adams, or more particularly the mutton that's in the stew.
That is, if I may say so, a very nasty piece of black humour.
It's not brilliant, to be honest, you know, but you're on a deck with 655 guys on one of these ships, and black humour is going to abound, really.
So a sick naval joke gave Fanny Adams a place in the English language. Sweet Fanny Adams was shortened to Sweet F.A. in nautical songs from 1914. By then, Sweet F.A. meant getting nothing, where something was expected. The phrase Sweet F.A. or Sweet Fanny Adams may have started in the Royal Navy, but it's now used across the British Isles, almost entirely by people who have no idea that Fanny Adams was a historic person. And it's certainly hard to use the expression with the same levity when you know who Fanny was and how she died. It's best summed up in this poem by local Alton poet Joe Owen Smith. And so the English language found a new expression from this sorry tale of local pain. And far beyond the confines of the Royal Navy, folk would use poor Fanny's name in vain. And even here in Alton, I would say, not many now would give a sweet F.A.
The OED have asked for our help in creating a new entry, the expression Gordon Bennett. Here's a sneak preview of what they think it means.
Gordon Bennett, a mild exclamation indicating surprise, incredulity, exasperation, etc.
The earliest evidence they have is from a 1967 episode of Till Death Us Do Part. But we had hundreds of letters and emails about this. I mean, look at all this stuff, more than anything else on the word hunt list. And many of you pointed out that lovable father and son duo, the Steptoes, mentioned Gordon's name in an episode from 1962.
You wrapped him up? Yes, I have wrapped him up. Look, when I say that's that, then, it means I've done it all. It means I've finished. Gordon Bennett, if you've done all that after all these years. You could have forgotten.
Well, Ray and I first heard Gordon Bennett, the expression Gordon Bennett. We knew it very well from our childhood in the 30s. I mean, my father used it all the time. It was a substitute for saying God Almighty, which was considered to be blasphemy. You know, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, all that. And I mean, you know, even the working class in those days sort of certainly took it more serious than they do now. So rather than say God Almighty or even God Blimey, which really means God blind me, which must go back to the Middle Ages, people like my father will say, "Oh, Gordon Bennett," you know, as an expletive, you know, as a polite expletive.
I'll call the police. It's talk to the old man.
Dirty old man.
I'll get pneumonia, that's what I'll do.
I'll turn it up. You've only had a wash, Gordon Bennett.
Gordon Bennett. It was absolutely a steptoe expression. Gordon Brown, I suppose you'd say nowadays, wouldn't you?
But who was the original Gordon Bennett who might have inspired the phrase?
You had plenty of suggestions, but the most likely by far was an extravagant playboy and newspaper mogul from the late 19th century, notorious for some very strange habits. Word hunter John Humphreys reveals all.
Gordon Bennett was very much a Victorian Howard Hughes. He was a philanthropist, but also became known, he's in the Guinness Book of Records, for the most embarrassing engagement party antic. He turned up to his future wife's parents' house, he was drunk, and he proceeded to urinate on the fire, and Gordon Bennett was exclaimed by all. He also used to go up to diners in restaurants, and he would grab the tablecloth and try and whip it away. Again, Gordon Bennett was exclaimed by all, and he'd pick up the cost for the dry cleaning.
Bennett! It's a great theory, John, but without any written evidence to prove the connection between the Joker playboy and the polite expletive, we might have trouble getting that past the OED. Still, we've got our anti-dating. Hooray! Let's hope we can do the same with our last phrase-making hero.
Take the Mickey has proved something of a mystery to the OED. They define it as to behave or speak satirically or mockingly, to make fun of, satirise or debunk a person or thing. But where does it come from?
It's clearly a euphemism for the earlier take the piss. An old dictionary of rhyming slang claims Mickey Bliss is code for you-know-what. But are they right? And who was Mickey Bliss?
Neither I nor anybody else who's looked into the matter has ever actually been able to establish the existence of any connection with a real person called Mickey Bliss. Or even with Mike Bliss, because actually the first examples of the phrase from the 1930s are take the Mike rather than take the Mickey.
Is it frequent for rhyming slang to come from a particular person's name? And if so, is it usually a real person?
Overwhelmingly, when people are looking for a name to make a rhyme with, is that they either choose somebody famous or they make one up, like Britney Spears for beer, for example.
That's a bit of a half rhyme, isn't it, really?
Well, it depends how many, if you're having one beer or several beers.
So the Mickey Bliss theory, which is mentioned in the OED, may not, hold water. Luckily, you had plenty of other ideas. The phrase "take the Mickey" inspired many word hunters to report to us from the front line of the mail waterworks system. Chris Shepherd wrote to tell us that Mickey is Irish slang for a penis or an erection, so take the Mickey would be to render impotent or castrate, more generally to humiliate. And Dr. Ian White of University College London wrote to us with a more scientific theory.
Taking the Mickey comes from taking the mick, which is a shortened form of micturition, which is a more technical term for urination, coming from the Latin micurere. And it all really stems from the original term to be piss proud, which is a belief in the association of having a full bladder and an erect penis.
So piss pride is a kind of false pride, and if you take the piss away, you take the pride away?
It's literally deflating a false ego or pride.
Is this your own theory, or did you read it somewhere?
It's one of those theories that I've read somewhere and heard from various people that just seems to lodge in my mind as potentially more reasonable than a Cockney rhyming slang.
I'm sorry.
Is that just cock and bull? Maybe not, but there's no written evidence.
So, we've looked at erections, bladders and urine. We are going to dignify proceedings with the help of an elegant mind, thanks to a word hunter who suggested we got in touch with Adam Hart Davis.
In Tudor times, according to Adam, who actually wrote a book called Taking the Piss, barrels of human urine were shipped up to Yorkshire to use in the woolen industry to fix dye to wool. But first, vast quantities of urine had to be collected.
And buckets were put on street corners and chaps were asked to contribute, and every week a horse came around with barrels and they'd tip the buckets into the barrels and they'd bring them down here to the docks. This is just below London Bridge, and all along here there would be ships with tall masts. So one of the big cargoes was urine. So you captain captains of the boats were a little bit iffy about this cargo. So when somebody asked them, what are you taking? They said, well, we're carrying wine. And the other captain would say, you're taking the piss. And maybe that's where it came from.
Is there anything you can give me to help my argument with the OED on this?
They're difficult, are they? Well, I would say that this was a real business. This was a colossal business. Hundreds of tons of human urine was shipped from London up to North Yorkshire. And it's very likely that one or two expressions came out of it, and one of them must have been taking the piss.
You're not, as it were, taking the piss out of me, are you? This is a real thing.
Would I?
Great. I've got no anti-dating and a handful of intriguing but unsubstantiated theories on Take the Mickey. Thank goodness for the others. It's the moment of truth, the time when we present the evidence we do have to the OED panel, the gatekeepers of the great book itself. I'm about to face their forensic editorial team. They've scrutinised all the evidence we've submitted. Surely there can be no arguing with our anti-dating for Gordon Bennett. I also have high hopes for Bloody Mary and Round Robin. So how have we done?
Well, some not very good news. We've got Round Robin from the New Yorker, only we haven't, because it's not the right sense at all. Round Robins in the new sense are ones that have multiple recipients, and this is multiple senders. That's the defining characteristic, so the cartoon just doesn't work.
OK. Now, what about the Bloody Mary and our evidence that it was George Jessel's creation?
Bloody Mary is one where the wood hunters have done a great job. And here we are with the New York Herald Tribune 1939. That's a clear anti-dating.
So, with the scores finely balanced at 1-1, bring on Gordon Bennett.
We like your 5-year anti-dating from Steptoe and Son, but I believe we can do a bit better than that, can't we, Peter?
We can. How about 25 years better?
What do you mean? What have you been doing?
Well, it's not all our own work. We have to thank Jonathan Green, who's one of the best slang lexicographers in the business, and often sends us material. And this time what he sent us was You're in the Racket 2, a novel by James Curtis, 1937. He stretched and yawned. Gordon Bennett, he wasn't half tired. Ah well, suppose it had got to be done. Nice,